that it's informed by systems, it's informed by decades and even centuries of oppression and active suppressive systems. But there are ways that we can foster and cultivate all of that talent internally, that we don't have to just try to sit at somebody else's table, because that whole table is oppressive. That whole table is enclosed in a room that is meant to suppress our voices, right? It's like, let's build our own table.
Welcome back to Have a Map, where we talk all things career. Excited for today's episode. Have a DePaul alumni. It's always a great time to have DePaul in the house. We actually have a whole DePaul cast today, which is really cool. I think we did that one time with Melissa, but that was it. But my co-host for today is Ari. She is a DePaul student as well, like I already mentioned. Ari, do you want to say what up? I know you've been on here before, but you have a new role and you've changed a little bit. So want to tell them a little bit about your new role?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. I grew up a little bit with DIM. I am now an intern manager, and I help with the social media marketing. And yeah, I'm a DePaul student. Go Blue Demons. I'm a senior, so just pushing through this last quarter and really excited for that.
Love it, love it. Yeah, Ari's been killing it on the social media and helping work with some of our clients on that. So excited for that. And today our guest is Matthew Manning. Actually, see that Matthew is from Minneapolis, Minnesota, just like myself. So Matthew, welcome to Have a Map. Can you give us a brief introduction of who you are and a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, what's up? Happy to be here. Ari, congrats on almost being done. Push through. You got this.
Thank you.
Super exciting. I remember that day or that time in my life really well. But yeah, my name is Matthew Manning. I'm nearing 30 now. Been grinding in the entrepreneurship space since I was it was my 19th birthday, I think, that I started a nonprofit organization at U-Haul, which is one of the dorms at DePaul. And so my career kind of in entrepreneurship literally started on DePaul's campus. And so DePaul's bred me very much in that way. But right now I manage a company called Gumbo Media, as well as some of its affiliates and subsidiaries, including Melon Network, which is a e-learning platform, as well as Gumbo Fit, which is a fitness space. But Gumbo Media specifically is a media company specifically to expand the narrative of Black life. So we do that through various editorial processes and content. So we have our own print publication called Gumbo Magazine, which issue 1 came out last year. And happy to dive more into what that looks like. But beyond that, also have a lot of brand services that we do. So that's kind of the bread and butter of what we do right now. And what that looks like is essentially, different brands contract us to do logos, to do web design, to do copywriting, whatever it is that helps their brand grow and scale and become better. They contract us for, and then we subcontract all the right people, all of them Black and brown, at least for the most part. And put young people who are in the creative industries in positions to succeed with brands and with different groups of various sizes. So so we kind of manage things on all sides of the media coin, and it's been a blast. It's not where I expected to land, but it's exactly where I should be based on everything that's happened and how I feel when I'm here. So it's a little bit about me.
I love that. So we have a lot in common. We're both from Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
We also
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I saw that. I found that somewhere. I don't remember. Maybe probably on the website, but somewhere. Yeah. And then both came up with our ideas in U-Haul. I was obviously at DePaul, but freshman year I was in U-Haul as well. So I love that about you. And I feel like it's very interesting to think of like this entrepreneurial journey that you've gone through. Was that something that you knew you wanted to do while you were in Minnesota and then as you transitioned to Chicago, or was that something newer for you as you got into Chicago?
It's a little bit of both. It was definitely newer to me. The world of entrepreneurship, even just the notion, the language, the world of it, all of that was fresh to me. It wasn't anything that I expected to walk into or even stumble into coming from Minneapolis. So it wasn't planned by any stretch. But looking back, I think I was always on the path towards entrepreneurship. You know, being the kid, like I was thinking about this the other day, during the summers, early June, our community in Minneapolis would always have an art fair. And we lived on the block, like right on the outskirts of the art fair where people would start parking. And I'd have my dad whip up he was a chef. I'd have him whip up like his best lemonade and, you know, bake all these treats, and I would go out and sell them on the corner, right? Like I was always finding ways to make something out of nothing and to make ends meet, which we kind of had to as a family growing up. Didn't have a whole lot of resources, certainly had a lot of privileges communally, but so I was always very innovative, and what I did have was hard work. I didn't always have the skills, I didn't always have the knowledge, but I knew how to work hard. I knew how to, at least I tried not to complain about things. That's certainly gotten easier as I've gotten older. You know, we tend to center ourselves a lot as young people, and one of the lessons that I had to learn was how to kind of center others in the work, right? And so I learned how to pick some of those things up, and that's really what I found at DePaul. I had gone to Ghana in West Africa 3 days following graduation from high school. And I was there basically up until 2 weeks before going to DePaul, to the point where my roommate like had been hitting me up all summer. He hadn't heard from me. He was like, do I even have a roommate? I mean, I had really like isolated myself from the US community, Minneapolis and Chicago communities respectively, because I had been through a lot with my family. You know, my personal story is a big part of my story. You know, I struggled with mental health issues and all that type of stuff. And I just kind of come to a reckoning with that junior year and senior year of high school. So I said, I need a trip for myself. And I certainly wasn't in a position to pay for it, but I fundraised for like 2 years starting junior year and worked my way there. So I organized an entire fundraiser. I did a whole talent show at my school. I you know, swindled the school to give me the auditorium for free. And like I had Jamba Juice come and set up shop and like all of these things. And I'm like, I don't know where I learned these skills, right? But it was just innovation. It was picking up from those same things that I learned as a kid, just trying to make it. And so that entrepreneurial spirit was there, but that was kind of my first experience was fundraising and first experience with leadership. And I took that with me and remembered that when I went to DePaul. So when I went to DePaul and I realized that like the thing that made me happiest was working with others, was, you know, service. I started pouring all of my energy into like the service org. So I worked at like UNICEF DePaul and like all of these different student, I mean, we all know how many student orgs exist on the campus. So I dove in, and I probably did way too much my junior and sophomore year, but I was finding myself as a leader and what that looked like. And I realized that I had a lot of leadership skills kind of naturally that I had cultivated over time. And so I think that's kind of where I started to find that trait and that skill set. And I just sharpened it over the course of DePaul. I founded a nonprofit organization freshman year, very naively. You know, I don't know that I would say that organization was ever that successful. It certainly had some success, but it was a nonprofit that focused on serving youth in specifically in sub-Saharan Africa, even more specifically in Ghana and Uganda, and for a short period of time in Sierra Leone with small business practices. So, you know, if they had a beekeeping practice or tree nursery or piggery, you know, we didn't have a lot of money, but we had a lot of resources. I could hit up the local beekeeping practice in Minneapolis or Chicago and say, hey, do you have any extra suits we can bring over there next time we go? You know, because they've been using the same tethered suit for 4 or 5 years, and now they have 4 brand new suits. Now they can maximize their, you know, their output and their yields and make more money as a small business. And so finding ways to be innovative again with the limited resources we had as youth. And so that was all stuff that I learned and dove into and started to explore while I was at DePaul in those 4 years.
That is really impressive. I want to say congrats to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to learn more about your day-to-day work life, like how that looks like. I know you did mention Gumbo Media and what that is a little bit, but what does your work life look like now?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny thing because it's pretty similar to what it was before COVID. Obviously, schedules shift with everybody else's scheduling shifting, but I'd already been working from home I'd already been kind of on that freelance grind for a couple of years, trying to make a way with this startup, which is so difficult to do, and has a lot of challenges, has a lot of moments of doubt and imposter syndrome creep in, as any entrepreneur can attest to. But I'd already kind of been doing it. So I'm sitting in my home office now. I have to do some reorganizing in here for sure. More pleasant background to look at. But I've been working in this space for a few years. And so when COVID hit, nothing really shifted for me there. So my day-to-day is basically, I usually do have a lot of meetings because we work with clients. And so you have to check in about deliverables. You have to check in just about strategy. I have strategy sessions with the various designers and teams and, production crews that we work with. And so I wake up, I usually make myself kind of not a hearty breakfast, but enough to fill myself for the first few hours. And then I just get to work, sit behind my computer and monitor, sometimes hop on calls, sometimes run errands in order to get certain things done, small things to complete, small tasks to knock off the list and stuff like that. But it's basically, like going to an office. It's just that my office is down the hall from my bedroom and around the corner from my kitchen. So I can just take more breaks as I need to. One thing I will say though is that I've gotten a lot better at not being so hard on myself in terms of work, in terms of sitting down, feeling like I have to grind for 6-7 hours. It's not healthy. It's not how our bodies were, biologically equipped. Like we're not ready for that. Sometimes 20-minute bursts of really productive times and then a 10-minute break is a more efficient way to do it. So if I want to pull up a YouTube video and watch that, take a break, if I want to, go get a small bowl of chips or like some apple and peanut butter and some tea or something, like I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna give myself that break, as long as obviously my meetings and stuff permit it. But that's one of the benefits of I guess of working from home. But I think anywhere you work, that's one of the goals, and that's certainly become part of my routine as well. So it's basically sitting here, cranking away, working at the stuff, which I love to do because I love what I do. But then giving myself as many breaks as I need to, even if that's like a nap or something in the middle of the day, as long as my schedule permits it, as long as I'm not like, leaving work that needs to be done for clients left unattended. I'm a give myself the flexibility to tackle the day the way it feels right so that I can be productive. And then I try to shut down by 7-8 p.m. If we have any programs, like there's a track event tonight that I'll be going to for our fitness initiative, it'll be a later night probably, and sometimes emails creep in, late, and I try to turn that off, but sometimes it's tough. But yeah, I try to be done around 8 or so that I can enjoy the rest of my night. And then I do write as well, kind of also in the freelance space, not connected to Gumbo. I mean, I do copywriting for Gumbo and with Gumbo, but writing is what I want to be my eventual, like, this is my career, and then everything else with any business is supplemental, which the current business structure is starting to open up that space so that I can take more time away and it's going to be more sustainable on its own and all that type of stuff. But my goal, which is doable some weeks, not some others, is to set aside at least one day a week where I'm not working on Gumbo at all. So I'm working on Gumbo about 4 days a week, minus some emails and stuff. And then I'm really just working on writing that other day. And right now that day for me is Friday. So that's an intention. It's not necessarily truthful in execution every week, but yeah, that's a bit about my day to day.
I love that. And I think, a lot of things you touched on were, making sure that you feel comfortable in your day to day, right? And you feel, because it is all about like being in tune with your body. So, like, that you're doing stuff, but you're doing it to your efficiency based on like what your body tells you, right? Because I feel like in today's society, there's a lot of, grinding it out and just doing it on a day to day. And like, you just got to be up till like 1 a.m., 2 a.m. And that's not healthy at all for your body. That will take a toll on it. And especially in the creative industry where it's just like, your job, and I'm sure you relate to this, is your job is to come to your clients with ideas, right? So if you're up till 2 a.m. and then you have a 9 a.m. meeting, your brain is not going to be at that capacity to really be able to say, hey, I have this idea, or I have this idea. It's going to be a lot more cloudy and a little more funky and harder to get to that space. So completely understand that. So I know, I don't like this idea of labels, but how would you maybe label yourself as some of the work that you do, right? So you mentioned copywriter, you mentioned writer. Is that the space that you really like to live within when creating, or does that expand to other facets and areas that you all work on at Gumbo Media?
Yeah, I would say if I had to put a label to it, I'd probably say storyteller,
Hmm.
or storytellers plural as a collective, but for me individually, storyteller and architect, I guess. Which is funny because I used to be in the architecture space, the literal architecture space, which is actually where I learned the lesson for myself about making the time I need. Be sitting at a computer for like 70 hours a week, framing up windows on a building in a different country, and it's just like it wasn't work that I was connected to. And I would take my full hour for lunch that I was paid to take every single day, and people would look at me like I was crazy for taking that much time away from my work. But it's like, no, I value my mental health, and like this is my time. um, but I left that space thinking, oh, maybe architecture isn't for me. But I've realized in these last couple of years, so it's actually a really fitting question, that I'm still an architect in the sense that it's not literal, it's figurative, right? Like I love to build spaces. I love to build communities. I love to build businesses. I love to just build things that serve a specific function that is both functional, just like architecture, as well as creative, just like architecture, and feeds hopefully some kind of public good, just like architecture. And so I still function in kind of the role of builder, if you will, in terms of the way that I love to approach things infrastructurally. So anything from something curatorial like Gumbo magazine, where, okay, we want a hardcover, beautiful, colorful, book, essentially magazine that has artists from all over the world and has, rich photography in it and essays and stuff. And it's like, how do we go from that idea, from like nothing, to that idea being executed? How do we get from point A to point B, or point Z, really? Because there's all these steps in between. And I love that process. Like there's no space that makes me tick more than that space of just like pure raw ideation and innovation, and now finding some way to manifest it through effort, through creativity, through collaboration. And so I think for me, that's all about architecture. So I kind of see myself as a builder, curator, architect, whatever kind of language you want to use there. And then within that space, as a storyteller, using those platforms, using those spaces to expand our narrative collectively as, Black and brown populations in this country, which have been so suppressed and marginalized, and lack so much nuance and complexity. I think we're starting to see that a little bit, or shifting a little bit in the media space, specifically through like television, and a little bit through film and stuff in the last 2 or 3, maybe 4 years. But especially when we started this, there was very little representation anywhere that had nuance, that had complexity. It's like it was a very binary structure, and it still is in many ways, where it's like you have entertainment, celebrity-centric narratives. Everything is driven by kind of news media in a very celebrity-driven fashion, and like that is like central to American ideology. And then on the other side, we have, especially in Chicago, we have just mass stereotypes and monolithic thinking around who Black and brown people are, what our communities look like, what our values are, all that type of stuff, all of these stereotypes. There's 46 million of us, specifically just in Black America, that live in this country, somewhere in between there, who are everyday people living their lives, trying to express themselves, find unique ways to build a life for themselves. And it's like those stories, every one of those stories is a story. Every one of those stories is worth telling. And so for us, it's about building the spaces, and then once we have the spaces, using them as vessels and catalysts to amplify everyday narratives with more complexity, and trying to avoid just kind of entertainment-driven narratives in the process, because there's nothing wrong with them. I love hearing about Ava DuVernay and Issa Rae and all those folks. Like, they inspire me. Those are role models to me. But it's the same 400 stories we hear on a monthly basis. Let's get some new stories in here. Everybody has something to teach. Everybody has something to offer. I can learn something, and am learning something from everybody on this call, just as we're speaking, right? Like, there's so much we can learn from each other. So that's a long-winded way of saying kind of architecture or architect and storyteller. Those are the two labels that really feel like they've defined my life, at least from a career perspective.
Yeah. And for you, where did that really, that idea of storytelling and architecture, right? Because as a trained architect, right, storytelling isn't in the quote unquote description of that, right? So was that love for storytelling brought to you through watching television, reading books, reading magazines? Where did that all stem from?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it stems from my immigrant background. So I'm originally from Stockholm in Sweden. I'm originally from Scandinavia. I was born there to two American parents. My father was, born in Norfolk, Virginia, grew up there as a singer, ended up going to New York, finding some success, sang at the Apollo with James Brown and like all of these little like tidbits, and then found success due to his partner at the time, who, he had children with, who are my older half siblings, was a Swede. And so she went back to Sweden and he went back there, and she kind of convinced him you could probably have a lot of success here. And he did. He blew up and he became kind of a soul, modern day soul icon in Sweden, which was really cool. And so he had success there as a singer. My mom is a second generation, American, I guess, if you will, but all of her ancestry, literally all four grandparents, are from Scandinavia, are from Sweden. And so she studied abroad in Sweden to learn more about her ancestry. And so my parents, both Americans, met in Sweden while living there and like building their careers there, and ended up staying for about 20 years. And me and my two younger sisters were all born there. So I lived there. And then we went to Minneapolis in about 99. So I didn't actually speak English fluently, at least until fourth grade. And so I think that's part of what informs, one, how I speak, because I learned it really formally at a much later date. I missed all of grammar school, which is K through second grade. So I missed all of that. I didn't learn any of that. I had to dive in while all of my friends were, already in classes. I would hop out and skip to a different ESL class to learn English as my second language. And so because of that, I think I have a different appreciation for the language. I fell in love with the language in many ways. And writing and reading had always it was my hardest subject. It was a subject I was worst in because I was literally just learning the language. And like math and science were at the top. And then somewhere between probably around sophomore year of high school, somewhere around there, it started to flip. And like suddenly English had just become this thing that I wanted to master and I wanted to get better at. And I found myself becoming a pretty decent writer in class, and I was performing well in writing. Coincidentally, all the math stuff started to plummet, but that's a different conversation. And so I just started to explore it. And then when I got to college, I started to use it. I mean, I mentioned mental health stuff. I started to use it as an outlet as well. And so writing actually became my form of therapy in a way. And I'm not advocating for writing individually as a substitution for therapy or anything like that. But for me, it was definitely a needed release valve. We all need our release valves. And I think creative passions allow those valves to release any pressure that we're building up so we don't explode or implode from whatever pressures that, are mounting in our lives. And writing for me was that. And so after that, it was game over. I mean, since freshman year of college at U-Haul, I've been writing almost every day since. And it's not always sitting down writing something formally. Sometimes it's just I get a line and I add it to my phone, or I write a poem. I'm not a poet, but I write a poem just to get some form of expression out, or I read a script or whatever. So reading and writing have since become just a staple in my life and have become kind of the predominant passion in my life. And subsequently I've gone back to master's program also at DePaul and completed that in writing and publishing. So now I'm studied in it as well, which only goes so far, but I guess shows at least my passion and commitment to it.
Isn't it amazing just how, some small, from when you're young and, something in your life just completely changes for you, is moving to Minneapolis, and just that can just completely switch your life in the future. sets you to who you are. And
Sure.
it be yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's beautiful, honestly. I feel like I wouldn't say I completely relate to it, but my parents are first, well, I'm a first generation kid, and my parents are from Mexico. And so
Mm.
growing up, I was born here, but growing up, I did spend a lot of time in Mexico, and
Mm-hmm.
um, I my first language is Spanish. And in elementary school, I did start to learn English, but um, I was pulled out of class to like learn more English, I guess I would
Mm-hmm.
say. It was ESL. It's called ESL.
Mm-hmm.
And there was some part of my life also where, mental health is very huge for me, and writing was also a huge therapeutic thing for me.
Yeah.
And so I can relate to that. And I don't know if writing is how big or how impactful it'll be for my future,
Mm-hmm.
but hearing your story, it just kind of comforted me because I can sort of see myself like that too. I would write down a lot of my feelings, a lot of things I would go through, and it would help me out a lot. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Beautifully said. I agree.
And I think it's that appreciation for culture, right? For
Yeah.
me, both of my parents are from West Africa. My mom's from Liberia, my dad's from Gambia, and growing up in an African household, you learn more about that culture, rather than like the U.S., right? So like my parents weren't really like as understanding of like the black culture here, right? A
Mm-hmm.
lot of it stemmed from what was happening in West Africa and what was their identity there. So for me, I really tapped into culture for me to have an understanding of it, and then also tapping into my friends, obviously to learn about their cultures as well. So for me, like our identity at Demi Vance is really understanding multiple people's cultures and bringing that all together into one, to create unique experience for those people. So I think I relate completely to that because studying culture, and we just talked about this on a previous podcast, but like going to different areas and understanding culture helps you to really see, all right, this is going on here, this is going on here. I identify with this, right? I may not be from that area, but I also still identify with that. And oh, here's like a description or an idea that I see that I relate to that's not where I'm from. And I think that's such a beautiful thing about like traveling and all of that stuff. And you touched on like going to Ghana and really, finding part of you there. I think that's such a necessary thing for people to do, is just to travel and really find themselves because, I think, I don't know why traveling is so important to like find yourself, but something within discovering yourself just happens during that time.
Yeah. I think it's about discomfort, and maybe discomfort is too strong a word, but at least being removed from your immediate comfort zone. There's something about removing yourself from yourself and from everything that frames who you are
Mm,
that forces you, I mean, in a quite a literal way, forces you to think about who you are, forces you to think about what you value, what you care about, what's important to you. You start noticing cultural differences between, whatever place you're visiting or living in temporarily, whatever it might be, and how those things feel different. And then you start asking questions like, well, why do they do it that way? And why do we care so much about these little things, and it's, yeah, I think those things are really important. And I think it's being pushed outside of yourself, and kind of forced to reckon with both positively and negatively, especially from a privilege standpoint when it comes to the States, depending on where you're traveling to, um, to just sit with and better understand like the nuances of your experience, and all the things that inform that, especially as you both mentioned, from families that have a multicultural background and are still very connected to it, either first generation or like second generation or recent immigrants. I mean, I remember being there's something part of what's beautiful about writing is being able to express all of that too, and like sit with that. I mean, when you write, at least from a therapeutic standpoint. And most of what I write is not therapeutic anymore. It's kind of now just pure storytelling and, you know, essays on you know, different folks and different people, features, stuff like that. But expressing that and trying to write through that was a way of actively asking those questions and actually sitting with that. So it's not just in my head, I'm starting to write it out. And I would find a lot of times when I would look back at what I wrote, sometimes it would just be a flurry of, you know, I don't know what's flying out of my fingers right now, but it's something's coming out. And then I'd read it back and I'm like, that's exactly how I felt. But there was no way to express that verbally. It had to come out in that format, at least for me. And for others, that's music or dance or whatever it might be. But so I think everybody needs that type of creative outlet, especially when you live at, you know, in the margins, or when you live in at the intersections. So for me, like, I wouldn't necessarily say I lived at the margins. I had a lot of specific privileges as a kid, but you know, we certainly had our struggles as a family too. But I did live at the intersections, and so I always felt very isolated by that. I was an immigrant. Not only was I an immigrant, but I was an immigrant from a country where everybody expected me to be blonde and blue-eyed. I was also raised mostly by my mother. So what does it mean to be raised as a radical Black man by a white mother in a largely, you know, I was Southwest Minneapolis. I went to Southwest. So, I mean, if you know Minneapolis, super privileged area, right? But what does it mean to be one of the less privileged families in a super privileged area, get the privileges of my community, but feel the disadvantages of my individual family, you know, struggling to pay the bills or taking bucket baths because we don't have electricity or heat. Like, there were so many intersections of my experience, you know, being a kid who could go home and eat Swedish hors d'oeuvres or have, you know, soul food. Like, what does this mean? How do I reckon with all of the things that I am? And so none of my life feels binary in any way. It feels like it's been framed by others by binaries, but I've been trying to explore all of those fluid spaces in between. And writing has been my vehicle for doing that.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And yeah, that intersection, right? It's so fascinating because, you know, as a Black man, I think figuring out that, seeing whatever they put out in the media, especially like in the 90s, right? When like, I feel like, you know, everybody likes to say like in the 90s, Black television was like at its peak, or like at its television and movies, they were just so great. But like, it was only such a small segment of what Black culture was for somebody, right? Like, there was no story like your story out there where, you know, you have a Black man from, you know, Sweden, and like, and there's no intersection to really tell those stories. And that's why I think what you all are doing there is very fascinating at Gumbo, because, you know, there's so many different stories for Black and brown people, and they're not communicated, right? You only have these linear and like you were saying, monolithic ideas of this is what it means to be Black. So now if you don't fit into that bucket, then you're just like, what? Like, I don't, what am I supposed, do I have to conform to this? Or do I need to shift in a different way? So
100%.
Yeah.
And even within Black life and within Black culture, we perpetuate those ideas as well. I mean, even the phrase Black culture, it's like, I hear that and I instantly get insecure, right? Because growing up, I never felt like I was part of what it meant to be part of Black culture. Like, somehow that had been canonized in such a way that, to your point, you had to fit kind of the aesthetic, the vernacular, the sounds, the movements of like a 90s, you know, 90s sitcom or whatever. Like, there's certain ideas around how you need to sound, how you need to dance, how you need to dress, how you need to carry yourself in order to fit within that. And that's just not the case, you know. You're not Black based on how you act, you're Black based on your identity and your, you know, and all of those things are part of their nuance for all of us, and you know, finding ways to be confident in that and carry that and allow that to be a broadened definition of what it means to be Black or brown or any other kind of, you know, ethnic or cultural group, I think is really beautiful and important, especially today, because there are so many intersections out there that just aren't being seen and reflected. And I think it makes a lot of people feel isolated in their own worlds, you know, or like they have to conform to be somebody that they're not in order to feel accepted.
What would you say, and going off of this, right? If you had to define your impact on the world, right, what would you say that is?
Like ideally when all is said and done, or right now?
You can go off of right now. You can go off of when it's said and done. Like, what are you looking to get to, or where's your aim? Where are you aiming towards?
Yeah, I'll definitely go towards what the goal is, because I don't know that I don't know that my impact right now, I don't think is where I want it to be, and I don't think is big enough. And I think I'll always be chasing that. And I think, as we all should, that should always be somewhat aspirational. But we should certainly find the time to be grateful for ourselves as well. But um, my goal, I don't know. It's simple and it's complex at the same time. Like the simple part of it is like I just want to help make people's day. Like I want if I encounter somebody, whether it's at a register or it's down the street or it's at next door cafe, and we chop it up for a second, I want them to feel like their day was brightened, just based on the energy that was brought into that conversation or whatever. Like there's part of me at the very innate, just human core of me that just wants to empathize and connect with people. Again, this is that storyteller piece that wants to connect with people in a really earnest way based on just who we are as people. I want that human exchange in like every facet of life. I want to cut through the noise. I just want to be real. And so my storytelling from a writing perspective outside of the business work really explores like real human themes, and it's not always heavy. It's not always dark or anything like that. It's just, there's a lot of, you know, 13 ways to do this, 12 ways to do this. It's like, can we just have a conversation? Can we just talk? There'll be dozens of ways to learn about yourself in that process. And so just having real earnest conversations and using that as a way to uplift people and, and hopefully brighten people's days and weeks and months, I think is a simple goal. The more complex one is, especially for the Black community, just thinking about equity and representation is really important to me, whatever that looks like. And I'm not trying to put too many limits around that, because what I've learned is that we need to be malleable. It's good to have a plan. It's good to be strategic and to constantly revisit that strategy, but it's also good to be malleable to what the world has given you and adjust accordingly. And I'm not saying surrender something that you're passionate about. I'm saying allow your passions to continue to grow and iterate. And one of my passions in the way that it's grown is all this community stuff. And so it's like, I want to build spaces that foster equity and representation, that foster real equity in terms of impact and systems as well. I think of Black buying power in the United States as an example. Like, we're over $1 trillion. Like that's so crazy to me. Over $1 trillion per year in buying power. And over 85% of that is spent outside of our community.
Yeah.
In feeding into systems that actively oppress us. And so it's like, but if you look at, across Mexican cultures, as an example, if you look across, Chinese cultures or other Asian and Latin American cultures, most of those dollars, or especially immigrant cultures. So I'm from, Minneapolis, so there's a huge Somali diaspora, there's a huge Hmong diaspora. If you look across all of those cultures, the vast majority of dollars are circulated within their own communities. Yeah. And so thinking about what does that look like, right? And that's not the fault of Black people, especially in this country. I think we all know that. We don't all know that clearly, as our country right now indicates. But we, at least we here, know that to be true. We know that it's informed by systems, it's informed by, decades and even centuries of oppression and active, suppressive systems. But there are ways that we can foster and cultivate all of that talent internally, that we don't have to just try to sit at somebody else's table, because that whole table is oppressive. That whole table is enclosed in a room that is meant to suppress our voices, right? It's like, let's build our own table. We got all the resources we need. We got all the talents we need. Let's stop giving, unless that's the path that we've chosen, which is fine. But yeah, if we feel like, we're tired of surrendering our passions and our interests and our talents to people that don't care about our representation, that don't care about equally representing our voices or, fairly compensating us or whatever, then, let's do it ourselves. There's plenty of talent to do that. And we don't believe any narrative that tells us otherwise. And so like, that's the architecture piece. It's like, how do we build an entire nucleus of systems and entire ecosystems where both as the curator and the creator, as well as the creatives who are feeding that, as well as the consumers who are consuming whatever's being created, as well as the champions who are reinvesting and can we build a circular ecosystem? Can we build a circular economy where, and I'm not just talking about the economy from a financial, I'm quite the socialist being from Sweden. So I'm not just talking about it from like a capital market standpoint. I'm talking about it holistically. Like when it comes to wellness, when it comes to capital and dollars, when it comes to, even representation and storytelling, like how much of that can we feed ourselves? Can we create for ourselves and then re-support through kind of these circular investment models in ourselves and in each other? That to me is like, that it's mind blowing to think about the potential there. And so I want to contribute to that as much as I can, because we are the zeitgeist. I mean, I say this all the time, but there's not a single country you can go to in the world where you're not going to find Black people. There's not a single dance or song or something that hasn't been influenced in some way by, our contributions into this world, especially right now. If we create something or do something here that becomes like a viral moment, like a dance, and how many of them have there been over the last 5-10 years? Like literally dozens, right?
Yeah.
They'll be dancing it around the world the next day. Like that's crazy. That's influence, that's power. So how can we harness that and channel that and build our own systems around that so that we don't have to be dependent on anybody else's permission? I don't care about permission. I don't need permission. I'm going to dive in and I'm going to do it for myself and for my people. And I want to do it as collaboratively, as innovatively, as creatively as possible. So
I love that. And as a goal, that's the direction we should be aiming for. Like that's for me, that's why I have a huge fight for ownership. And I don't think everybody is meant to go into that direction for ownership, but
for sure,
that's everything that we always try to preach is, I think that's one of the things that really hurts us as Black and brown people, right? Where we're not owning any of this, right? And I think even before you even get to owning it, right? If you own it, that's cool, but like we don't even know how to monetize it, right? And that's where a lot of it, and when you talk about like the agency work, when you talk about like for us, we do management work on the other side of our company, our sister company. Like that's where that's just like a small club of people, right? So tapping into that club and understanding how to learn and figure out, oh, okay, this is how you all monetize the dance that I came up with, or this is how you all monetize the idea or the movie or the content. And as we continue to do more and more of that, I think that's where we can build these platforms for other people to come within, right? And create a network and an ecosystem for all of us to, financially take care of ourselves. Because too many times the narrative has been, hey, there's only this small piece out there for you. So I can't let you have it. I need to go get it. And then, if I can get you in, I'll try to get you in, rather than it's like, no, I can go build a whole network and you all can come and work with us on top of that and then teach you how to own your network. And now we have 4 networks, right? Because you got all these networks, and don't even get started on music and sports and all of that stuff. It's all like one group, right? And you don't have that many people in there. There might be like 4 major music, companies that own all these subsidiary record labels and all of that stuff. So
exactly. Yeah.
Well,
and I love that you mentioned, monetization. I love that you mentioned ownership, because I think another side of that, coin or dice or however many sides there are, right, is the branding piece. And so I think those things go very hand in hand because, I mentioned we do brand services. And so just like you talked about what you're doing with your sister company in terms of ownership and management, part of that is, in order to monetize it, you also need to brand it properly so that you have a voice, so that you know what that voice is, so that voice has a place in the market. And that's ultimately, it's not even about brand so much as it is about intellectual property. It's about understanding what is it that you own, what is it that you have, and how can you build an identity around that? How can you build and bake ownership and agency into that so that it can't be picked up and manipulated by somebody else who only wants it for the ideas and the bottom line of dollars, as opposed to the actual cultural value and impact that can have for your community socially, even politically, whatever else. And so, all important and all sides of the, the same coin. and it also goes to, there's also, I mean, nuances with that too. I mean, especially when you think of design or ownership models, a lot of the models that are being used are also very Eurocentric, right? So like also recognizing that it's okay to be different too. Just because we're talking about good design doesn't mean we're, adhering to whatever good design means to the agency down the street who's making millions, if not billions of dollars. We're talking about just a design that reflects who you authentically are and packaging that in a way that others can't, appropriate that. That's good design as it's related to the Black community, right? So like building pop-up websites and logos and stuff for a whole bunch of small Black businesses. We're working with a Black orthodontist in Bronzeville right now. We're working with an organics, produce business right now. We're working with an athletics brand. We're working with all sorts of different groups, all within the Black community, who are doing dope things and like thinking about, wow, that has a place, but like, let's make sure you get this right and this worked out tight so that others can't poke holes in it. Like this is yours, and you can carry this and you can lead this for the community, and that's a beautiful thing. So supporting each other to build that ecosystem is essential, really.
Yeah, I agree. It's really amazing to support those who are in your community, and it just goes back to also what you said about having a voice and being able to use that voice and tying that into representation. I know, like in entertainment, television, movies, I do believe it's so important to show tell stories that aren't that you haven't seen anywhere else, because little kids or people can see that and be like, yeah, that's me, that's actually me, and I've never felt like that before, and I've never seen myself in that position, or I've never seen myself on TV before or something like
right.
that. So yeah, I do agree
Yeah.
with that. So what advice would you give to someone who wants to be an entrepreneur, wants to be in freelance, and what would you give? So what advice would you give to someone who wants to do that and take that into action tomorrow?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And there are so many things, but to distill to one, I think one thing that maybe others haven't shared with this question in the past that might be helpful, that I think through a lot, is being creative about our approaches. And what I mean by that is, so often, especially when we enter into an entrepreneurship space, or even just into the job field, whether it's working a 9 to 5 or whatever, we feel like there's only one way to do it. Like people, so as an example, I did art history as my undergrad degree because I was going into architecture. Most people would go a software route and do like a technical degree in architecture for like a 4 or 5 year program at like a tech institute like MIT or something. First of all, I wouldn't have been able to get into MIT, so that's part of the problem. But the second problem is like maybe that wasn't the route for me, right? So I went a more liberal arts education route, and I remember people kept telling me like, "What are you going to do with an art history degree?" People make those jokes about that in English and philosophy and all these different things. And I internalized that. I was like, shoot, I don't know if I can really do anything beyond just architecture. So if I leave architecture, where else am I supposed to go? But then I went to this architecture firm after graduation. I was one of 10 people that were the summer interns. And I was the only person out of all the 10, 1 out of 10, that didn't have a technical software degree in architecture. So I didn't know how to work any of the software, Rhino, CAD, all this Autodesk stuff. I had no idea how to all that clicking on the windows and stuff. I had no idea how to do all that. I had to learn it, right? And so I remember on the first day at orientation, it was this massive building with 300 people. I was one of 3 Black people, which is one of the reasons why I left. But they dropped every single one of these interns off at a specific desk in a specific cubicle in a specific part of the building with a specific team working on a specific project. And they're like, this is what you'll be doing for the summer, go. This is what you'll be doing for the summer, go. And they literally said to me verbatim, I was the last person. And I sensed that I was like, something's off here. And they dropped me at a desk. They were like, verbatim, they said, I don't know, we don't really know exactly what you'll be doing this summer yet because you have a different background than everybody else, but you can kind of make this your, you know, your workstation, and then we'll figure it out. What I had though were business skills. What I had were people skills. I had empathy skills. I had an eagerness to learn. And I had this liberal arts education through art history. So I saw architecture differently. Other people saw the forms and the technical elements. I thought about the entire cultural history of the world that informed the reason why those buildings were built in the first place, right? So we just came at it from different perspectives. And because of my perspective was different, I found value in a lot of different places in the building. So by the time the summer left, I was one of two of the interns. I was invited to come back and stay and work there basically for, you know, as long as I wanted to, as part of the team. And I ended up not taking it because I realized it wasn't for me. But I think what that spoke to was I thought differently than everybody else. And because of that, I found a way to make myself invaluable in that space. So everybody else was working on, you know, in one space, on one building with one team for the entire time that they're there. Sometimes they're doing that for maybe 2 or 3 projects for like 4 or 5 years. Like that's part of the world of architecture. I was working with 4 or 5 different teams. I was in the wood shop. I was literally building the models, having fun, you know, listening to music and like, and, you know, and people think of that sometimes almost as like the janitorial work there or something, as if there's anything wrong with that, which is obviously not. That work is so important, but like, that's the mindset people had, right? Like that was below somehow the design of it. I'm like, no, I love getting my hands dirty and chopping this wood and like building it. And then I'd go and work with the arts department. And then I was working on building an equity group there with just that what didn't even exist. And then I was doing graphic design, which isn't what I was contracted for, but I had a skill set in, and was what I'm using now. I was doing graphic design for the board's meeting, you know, building their deck. And like, I was working with all these different people to the point where I got to work with every single team and almost every single director there. And I say all of that to say, sometimes we limit ourselves based on what other people, how other people, I mean, we talked about labels, how other people label us, right? If you have a philosophy degree, they're like, okay, what are you gonna do with that degree? I don't know. I mean, I'm learning philosophy here. I'm learning ideology and thought. There's so many different ways that I could bring that level of insight into any place that I go to. So I think because we live in a very consumerist, capitalist world that's very A to B, that's very like, you're trained in this to, you know, to do this work in a very machine-like way sometimes. And that's drilled into our education system as far as, you know, as far back as kindergarten. Because of that, I think sometimes we have it in our heads that what we're learning can only be used in one way, whether that's inside or outside of school. And I just fundamentally don't believe that to be true. So when people are saying they want to do music, but they're not finding the same success in, you know, in being like, you know, a rapper or a singer or whatever, it's like, have you thought about a producer? Have you thought about being a songwriter? Have you thought about, you know, being a sound engineer? Like there's so many cool opportunities to dive in. Have you thought about, you know, maybe you have a natural skill set in photography, maybe you do album artwork, you know, I don't know, like there's so many cool intersections, again, speaking of intersections, to find ways to maximize those talents and those skill sets. So whether it's something we're formally learning in school or talents that we're cultivating outside of school, just leadership or just in entrepreneurship or just lived experiences, finding creative alternative ways to live out those visions. Now, I mean, I was pursuing architecture and I mentioned I still, if I had to put a label on myself, I still see myself as an architect. Even though I never got the education, even though I never went and finished, you know, I worked in a internship for a few months over summer. I never completed that work. I never, you know, but I still see myself as an architect. And it's because I envisioned a new path that I can apply those things. I'm still building, I'm just building communities. I'm not building a building. I'm just building, you know, equity models and brands as opposed to, you know, doorways or whatever. And I'm not trivializing that path. That path is beautiful and there are parts of it that I miss, certainly. But like I found exactly what my niche is based on thinking outside of the box and trusting that the skill sets that I have, even if I'm different than everybody else in the room, means that I'm going to be the one that's going to come up with a different idea that's so far left field that they might just go for it. Or that's so far left field that they won't go for it and I'll just build it myself. Because I'm the only one who's able to think up of things like that. And we all have those skill sets. We all have those capacities in which we're different. So leaning into that, I think is my ultimate advice and what I've had to kind of master, and I certainly haven't, but again, aspirational. I'm trying to master in my career. It's just leaning into my, eccentricities and the things that make me different, and just using those as my superpowers.
I think that's so beautifully said, right? I think a lot of things you touched on, I want to just kind of briefly skim over them, but like one, not thinking monolithically in this idea of a label, right? I hate that. And as you saw when I first asked you that question, I said label, because for just our society, people can only, like, if we were to say, hey, this is Matthew Manning and he is this, that makes so much more sense to people, right? And that's the only way they're able to comprehend it. For some people, they can understand, like, hey, this man does all these different things, but he's an architect in the way that he builds and creates, right? And I think it's to that branding point of how do you communicate all of that, right? How do you communicate that so people understand it? And sometimes it's not for everyone to understand, right? Sometimes it's for a niche market and a specific community to understand. So love that. And then even to the point of education, right? Where they teach us, hey, you are to do this, right? You're just you're an accountant, or you're this, or you're that. And like you said, nothing wrong with that. But, sometimes I think we just have to break that down, because, that's one of the things that we do in our internship program, where interns are able to really jump into any department they really want to, right? You can be a graphic designer, but you can be coming up with a whole direction for a video campaign, right? So like being able to say you can do all of this, right? And I think through entrepreneurship, you learn a lot of that as well, where it's just like, hey, I don't even have a choice. I just have to do this. And you figure it out. And I think that for us is a big skill set that we really want people to learn. And that's, I think, what you talked about is like, sometimes you just got to figure shit out, right? Like that is a skill set. And a lot of people don't have that skill set because they've been trained their whole life to just do this one thing. And that's all I know how to do. So,
and it's active.
Love that. Yeah.
It requires active energy, and sometimes it's subversive. And I think sometimes it means really being intentional about what we're doing and maximizing even small opportunities to learn. And so one example of that is, especially, I thought I was stupid growing up in the States. I really did, because I'm like, I just learned English a couple years ago. I'm like, any formalized test that we did, all the way down to the ACT, like I did not perform well. I just didn't. I'm not good at those tests. That's not the way my mind works. I'm like, give me a canvas and I will create something. Give me, some ingredients, I will make a meal. Give me, some miscellaneous things, I'll find a way to communicate some kind of storytelling message. Like that's the way my mind thinks. And so I think about that little, GIF or whatever, the little meme about, there's like a snake and a monkey and a bird and a turtle. And it's like, okay, climb this tree. And that's our education system, right? We have all these bright, diverse, eclectic minds who think differently. And just because they think differently, people are ill-equipped to process things and succeed in education. Some people just are not well set up based on, the very X's and O's format of our education, which is very mathematically and scientifically oriented and not creatively oriented at all. The first budgets to be cut in any department across any, city of the country is the art department. It's like, it's the first budget to go. And that says a lot about where our value set is. We value the left brain thinking and not the right brain. And so thinking about that, I think, is important, down to maximizing the opportunities that present themselves. So if you have, I remember especially junior, senior year, I had a lot of papers where, okay, now I'm in my electives. I have, 20-page term paper due at the end of the quarter, whatever. It's whatever topic you choose as it's related to, the thing that you're doing. A lot of people go the easiest route. They do something that's very logical, very in line with what you've learned, and just like dive a little bit deeper with the research. I would find like the most weird, creative opportunity, like ways to tell a story, right? So think about what your passions are, and then like take every opportunity you can to maximize that. If you have to write a term paper and you get to pick the topic, why not pick something that you're super passionate about? So if you're doing something, around art history, for example, with my example, but you're also very passionate about music, maybe find some way, how has music influenced the architecture of these buildings? How does the design and the infrastructure of it lend itself to the sonics of the space? I don't know, I'm just tossing stuff out there. but like there's so many cool opportunities every single day in our education process, especially, but also just in daily life, where we can learn and cultivate that growth in ourselves and cultivate those passions by taking them seriously. Sometimes it means the work is going to be harder. Like I made school a lot harder for myself than I needed to because I pushed myself to take on harder challenges. And I think that's part of what we owe ourselves, is like take every opportunity you have to learn, especially when it's given to you. Like you can write your paper on whatever. Find some way to expand yourself in that process as opposed to just doing an assignment. Because a lot of assignments, you're just gonna have to do the busy work. You're not always gonna have the chance to like, explore and learn something about yourself in the process. So take every chance you can to do those types of things, especially in the education process.
That was beautifully said. Very beautifully said. Well, I want to thank you so much for jumping on here and having this conversation. Um, Inspired me to tap back into art history because I was at DePaul, I was an econ major, and just long story short, that was just trying to go to a route where you could get a job, but like art history was my passion. Like I really loved art history. Like I'm sure you remember where they show you something and then you have on the test day the little blue books and you have to write it out and explain what each piece was and all of that. So loved all of that. We like to end things on just kind of like where you are with consumption of music, right? I always think it's interesting where people talk about, music is a mood, music is kind of gets my day started. For you, thinking about this week, what song or maybe a few songs or an artist have been in your rotation constantly?
That's a great question. Thinking about this week. I have a lot of staples. I'm definitely a hip hop head, but I haven't been really in a position where I can listen to a lot of hip hop recently because it's super distracting. I just go down, like I can't get any work done when I do that because I'm just vibing too much. If I do, it's usually like a Kendrick Lamar or somebody that is pretty poetic and makes me think a lot. I love that. I love depth and everything to a fault, I think. This week I've been doing a lot of, in some of the later nights, I've been doing a lot of like classic R&B stuff. So like Anthony Hamilton, stuff like that. Like I just turn on Pandora or Spotify and like let it play. So whatever it gives me. But the thing I've been listening to most actually is classical, which I remember when I was younger, not liking classical. You know how everyone's like, I love everything except for country and classical. That was me for sure. But I've gained an appreciation for those things. And I love, well, not country as much, but classical for sure. But classical helps me specifically as a writer, right? Because it's tone music. It puts you in a mood. It puts you in a space where it feels like you can just flow. And it doesn't have any lyrics or music or, any lyrics or words or, even beats. So it allows you to be more fluid in your thought process. It allows me, I should speak for myself. It allows me to be more fluid in my thought processes. So Luke Howard is an artist that I like a lot. He does a lot of like piano classically. Olafur Arnolds, I hope I'm saying that right. He's Icelandic, I think he's Icelandic guy. He was a like heavy metal artist, and I don't listen to heavy metal. I don't really like heavy metal much at all, but he was like a drummer, and then somehow he took all of those and he played like 5 or 6 instruments, and somehow he took all of that, again, thinking differently and bringing it to a different space. He took all of that way of thinking and brought it over to the classical space, and he creates some really cool kind of electronic classical music that's beautiful and stunning, and he creates really beautiful visuals around it. So I listen to him a lot when I'm writing or doing work and like really need to barrel down and focus. So those would probably be my most consistent on a week-to-week basis.
Beautiful. And I'm the same way, right? I love hip hop, but when I'm working, that is not like the route I can go in. Right. But I came across this, I listened to classical music. I used to play the viola back in the day, but Peter Sandberg, he's actually, I just looked him up, but he's actually from Sweden.
Interesting.
And he does like more contemporary classic music. You should check him out. He's definitely one of I found him on a playlist randomly on Tidal. And then I just like been listening to all of his stuff great for work. Just takes you different places because it's like contemporary
Yeah.
but still classical vibes there.
Yeah, that sounds super dope. I just looked them up, so I'm gonna definitely check them out. It sounds a lot like Olafur Arnalds from Iceland in terms of just the vibe I'm getting already. So, yeah, super dope.
Look it up. Ariana, what about you? What have you been listening to?
Well, first thing, that's funny, Mo, that you played that because I played the violin in middle school.
Look at that.
It's my
I don't
world.
really listen to classical. I listen to like movie scores. I mean, they can go,
Mm.
I guess, kind of like hand in hand.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, it's same thing. It's like there's no lyrics or anything. And I have like a playlist of just movie scores that I like to listen to when I'm studying or um, when I was writing. I used to listen to that too. It gives me a lot of inspiration.
Hmm.
But my go-to right now, it's like two complete opposite things. Um, so it's a lot of throwback music. So it's either like 80s disco or I'll listen to 90s rap. So I mean, mainly it's right now I'm in like a Tupac phase, but
Yeah, I mean, that's a necessity for sure.
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's cool that you listen to movie scores. Yeah, we probably listen actually to or have encountered a lot of the same artists then, because a lot of what pops up, especially miscellaneously on classical playlists and stuff, is from movie scores. If Beale
Yeah.
Street Could Talk,
Oh,
which is a Baldwin book, like that score is
yeah.
probably my favorite in the last decade. It's so beautiful, and there's a lot of other good ones too.
Yeah, I'll listen to like the same composers who have done those scores and
Hmm.
have done other movie scores. So yeah, but there's I'd say one of like my all-time favorites. Well, if Beale Street Could Talk is really good, but
Hmm.
one of my all-time favorites is one called Phantom Thread.
Mm. I'll check that out. Gotta put me on.
This is great. Look at that. See, this is why we always do the music question because it's great music to always listen to. I always find something new. So, but I do want to thank you for your time and what we like to do at our internship. Since we are virtual, we give everybody a round of applause. So, thank you so much, Matt, for joining us.
Pleasure.
And thank you for everybody who listened to this episode of Have a Map. We are out and hope you enjoy listening to this in your morning, your afternoon, your evening. But peace. Skirt, skirt.